131873 is our number here. We're going to play you an interview shortly with Ian Horner, who is of course, he's a contributor. He's an entertainment reporter who has interviewed Bruce Beresford, and Bruce Beresford is quite an extraordinary person because he's 85 and he's just made a new film. We'll bring that to you very, very shortly. In the meantime, from the world of entertainment, Ian Horner, he's a veteran entertainment reporter. He's a contributor to us on a Friday night show. He's done an interview with Bruce Beresford, an Australian director. And if you look at Bruce Beresford's career, his first movie was Barry Mackenzie in 1972. And if you look at Barry Mackenzie, Don's Party, Breaker Morant, The Club, Puberty Blues, just those films, That's a very successful career. But then he started directing in Hollywood. He directed Academy Award-winning movies. But he's 84, and he's still going. He's just directed his new film, The Travellers. Features Bryan Brown, actually. And so I talked to Ian Horner about this, who'd spoken to Bruce Beresford. So he's going to bring us some of Bruce Beresford. But Ian Horner, I mean, to be still working at the age of 85 and not hanging up your hat, a lot of stamina there.
Oh, it is, mate, yes. He's had an extraordinary career, and you think for the things he'd done, he'd just give it up now and just enjoy the limelight, but he's still working and making some movies, and the latest one is The Travellers, which is in cinemas with Bryan Brown. But you're right, he began many years ago with the Barry Mackenzie films, and then he did Breaker Morant, and I've got to say, I was studying film at uni at the time, and Breaker Morant just blew me away. It was quite a moment when I realised that we could make films that were every bit as good as anyone anywhere else. It was a great film. Then he did Tender Mercies with Robert Duvall, and he won an Oscar. And ever since then, he's been working with an extraordinary range of people. In fact, listen to this list of people he's directed. Jane Fonda, Morgan Freeman, Tommy Lee Jones, Glenn Close, Richard Gere, Jessica Tandy, Pierce Brosnan, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. You know, we've just lost Diane Keaton, and he directed her in Crimes of the Heart with Jessica Lange and Sissy Spacek, and there's a cast.
And look, Ian, and you've interviewed him, one of these interviews you do for a new film, which is Travellers, but part of that was to go through some of this cavalcade of actors, including Diane Keaton, who we recently lost, who he did direct.
That's right. He made Crimes of the Heart with her and Jessica Lange and Sissy Spacek. What a cast that is. You know, not all the big names have been easy to work with, and he shared some hilarious stories of working with the difficult ones, or, as it sometimes turned out, not working with them. The big exceptions included Keaton, Lang and Spacek.
Well, the three girls in the lead, well, there were four of them, counting Tess Harper. They were all fabulous. You know, at first I thought, oh, this is going to be a nightmare, you know. They'll all be bossing me around and they'll argue and all that kind of thing. Never happened. They were all very cooperative. They all understood that to play sisters, they had to be very convincing. And the basic love between them had to be there. You know, they made every effort to make this work. They were all charming.
You've often said the bigger the star, the easier and more personable they are to work with because they've got nothing to prove.
Yeah, that's true.
But it's not always true, is it? You had a few moments with Robert Duvall.
Well, yes, the problems with Duvall were really nothing to do with doing the film. That was what was strange. Directing him in the role, he was always kind of rather surly. He never argued the toss. If, you know, I'd say, look, Bob, you come in the door, we have the dialogue here, we move the camera to here, you sit here, you do that. He never argued about anything. He just did it. But apart from that, he was difficult. He was sort of uncooperative and, you know, like I remember one scene, I had to do a shot the other side of the town of him coming out of a bar at sunset. And I said to him, look, Bob, we've got it all worked out. We go over there and we'll get the sunset shot exactly right. And he said, well, what's the problem? And I said, we can't take your trailer. He had a trailer like 60 feet long. And I said, we'll never get over there in the trailer in time to get the shot. And he said, well, what do you want to do? I said, you come with me in the car. And he said, oh, no, I've got to have the trailer. And I said, but Bob, I need you to come out of the bar at sunset. And if you don't come in the car, we won't get it. And he said, well, I'm not coming in the car, I want the trailer. I mean, that was the kind of thing he did that just drove me mad. So we did do the shot, but he was coming out at night time. It wasn't correct, you know.
You also told me about that wonderful conversation you had with Jodie Foster.
Oh, yes. She said to me, there's no point in arguing with me. And I said, why not, Jodie? I have a different viewpoint. And she said, but I am so intelligent, I can't be wrong. What an amazing thing to say.
You've cast Jodie Foster and she became pregnant. She couldn't do Double Jeopardy. You replaced her with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yes.
And had problems, I understand.
The studio arranged for Michelle and I to meet every day. We'd meet and go through the script and I'd make a note of her suggestions. But her suggestions made it into a different film. It wasn't Double Jeopardy. And I went back to the studio head and I said, look, she's going through everything in a rather pedantic sort of way. The changes are so extreme that you'll no longer have Double Jeopardy. It'll be a different film with a different story and different characters. We should do that, but not with me. I said, you do it with Michelle, or I won't do it. The alternative is drop Michelle and find someone else, which is what they did.
You did all that work on the Bridges of Madison County, and then you didn't end up directing that film.
Well, that was another one because the studio wanted Clint to play the lead and me to direct it. But I realised when I was meeting with Clint, he actually wanted to direct it and play the lead. He was always polite, but he was completely uncooperative. I mean, he was sort of friendly, but he didn't cooperate at all. And so I went to the studio head and I said, look, this isn't going to work. Because I said, I've got a leading actor who is a sort of like a brick wall. He doesn't say or do anything helpful. You better let him direct it and I'll go. And that's what we did.
So Clint Eastwood directed it, and I mean, Clint Eastwood is a great director, isn't he? He's fantastic.
He's a terrific director, yeah.
Well, let's just go to this new film, Travellers, because Bryan Brown's in that, and so it's almost like a full circle thing, isn't it, with Bryan Brown, because he was directing Bryan Brown when he was just a boy.
That's right, yeah. In fact, they were both in their 30s when he did Money Movers. Bryan was 31. And then, not long after, a couple of years after that...
That's a boy, isn't it, really?
He's a boy, yeah. They did Breaker Morant, which, of course, was just a breakthrough film. It was a really stunning piece of work. A great drama, and Bryan Brown was terrific in that. Along with Jack Thompson and Edward Woodward, they were also fantastic. And Bruce, at this stage, was all of 40. What were you doing at 40, mate?
Oh, no. Just in terms of Breaker Morant, I was much younger because I was in my 20s. But Breaker Morant, there was an event, because I was working as a very young reporter in my 20s at Parliament House. And they'd set up, I think it might have been when they'd set up the Australian Film Commission and Bob Ellicott was the minister. And they actually had a screening of Breaker Morant at Parliament House because they thought this film was the one that was really going to turbocharge the Australian film industry. And we came out of that film going, yep, that was pretty good. So they knew they had something special there, directed by Bruce Beresford.
They did. They really did have something special. Even though it was such a critically well-received film, it's still referred to as a flop, at least by Bruce himself. He said the business wasn't there, didn't get enough business at the box office. But nevertheless, it really established him as a quality filmmaker. And so when I spoke to him about working again with Bryan Brown, who's now, of course, 78, and Bruce is, as you said, 85, I asked if he'd found whether Bryan had changed much in the 45 years since Breaker Morant.
He seemed to me to be unchanged. He's a very dedicated actor. He's very thorough. He listens to anything that I have to say, but he is incredibly well prepared. He understands the character from reading the script.
Hello, Dad? My godfather. I got an opera to do in Germany. What opera? Doesn't matter. You never heard of it. You don't know anything about opera. What is it? It's Traviata. Never heard of it.
He never fluffs a line. He came on totally prepared. He's always very cooperative. If I suggest something, he says, oh, yes, mate, I see what you want. And then he just does it.
You love opera. That plays a strong part in The Travellers. I was intrigued to read that you don't read music, yet you've directed opera on stage.
Yes, but
Do you
that's
think
right.
reading music would actually help or hinder you?
I think it would help. I've tried to learn to read music. My daughter plays the clarinet. I said, look, I want you to teach me how to read music. And she came here to the house a few times, and then finally she said to me, forget it. She said, you're not intelligent enough to learn how to read music.
How is The Travellers doing in cinemas? Do we still have a cultural cringe?
I don't know. I mean, the audience's responses are very good. I've seen people laughing and I've seen people crying. A friend of mine emailed the other day and said he'd just seen the film in Adelaide, and he said he cried. He said, I suddenly found myself bursting into tears.
How much of you is in the Bryan Brown character?
There's none of me in the Bryan Brown character. Some of the little quirks the character's got I stole from little oddities of my father.
Right.
Having a shower fully dressed.
Don't you think that's a bit strange?
I'm washing my bloody clothes as well as me. What's wrong with that?
He did that. He thought that was a great idea. Also, there's a scene in it where he takes his son on a visit to a man he thinks is a direct descendant of Jesus. That was an incident that happened to me with my father. It made me think, this guy's a brick short of a load.
Do you find local audiences resist local product?
I'm told by the distributors that people under 30 tend to very much favour American popular films, not so much Australian films like The Travellers. But they said there is a big audience for those films from the over 30s. People have got big TV screens, they just watch stuff online at home. I still like going to a cinema and seeing a film in a well projected on a big screen with good sound and an audience reacting. I mean, that's quite an experience.
Bruce Beresford, and just hearing him say that, that's interesting because as the years have gone on, we've got these huge television screens. We can see it at home, and that's one of the challenges for cinema. But look, you can hear that full interview. That was Ian Horner's interview with Bruce Beresford. You can hear it on the Gossip and the Critic podcast. You can find that on YouTube. And I found some of those comments really interesting because people still have that cultural cringe. Oh, it's an Australian film. Well, it's being directed by a legendary director who's made huge films, Academy Award-winning films in Hollywood, and BRYAN BROWN, who's an international star. So anyway, the film's called The Travellers. He's Bruce Beresford, and thank you very much for Ian Horner's interview with him right there. 3.5 minutes to 10.